Thank you for joining in for our second week in our webinar series. On behalf of my colleague, Nina Patel from Video Conferencing for Global Learning, it's a joy to welcome you here. My name is Renee Carver, and I've had the pleasure of working with Dr. Claudette Crawford-Brown, Dr. Khadijah Williams, and Mr. Sidney Henry to try to pull this series of talks together for you. We're excited that they're here with us. Dr. Henry this morning will present on food security and its interconnectedness to globalization and international relations.
I'm not hearing you, Renee.
Migration. Specifically, he'll discuss how the movement of people and the public policy which informs this impacts on food security in a globalized world. And Dr. Esnard will examine the structural inequalities and mobilities of seasonal farm workers from the Caribbean. Her work offers some insights into the structural vulnerabilities and systemic challenges of the minority groups such as women and mothers in this program. It also looks at issues of precarity and calls for regional collaboration and policies that address the systemic issues affecting the social mobilities of these workers. To start us off this morning, we're lucky to have Dr. Claudette Crawford-Brown back with us to share with us a few minutes of introduction. Dr. Crawford-Brown, go ahead. All right, having lost Dr. Crawford-Brown's video feed, Mr. Henry, I think it best if we put you on the spot and ask you to continue for us.
And good morning, everyone, and greetings to everyone, wherever you are in the world. I'm happy to be a part of this opportunity to share in this conversation. I will discuss with us a little this morning the issues around food security and its interconnectedness to globalization and international relations, especially with regard to migration. How the movement of people and the related public policies that inform this impacts food security in a globalized world. I think I'd start out with the idea that the construction of meaning in the discourse that posits globalization as a subject is to be found on a continuum of dynamic interpretations. The concept spans the social and economic and sometimes spiritual and political spectrum of the human experience in a kaleidoscope of human relationships. What is this inevitable process of interconnected experiences in which we are all powerless players groping for meaning? I would say this seemingly predetermined natural path towards outcomes that is often devoid of justice and equity and fair play. Too often it seems the experience seems to abandon or disenfranchise and deny large swaths of humanity while creating some kind of unfettered access and ops. The underbelly, I think, of this phenomena includes the manipulation and the application of what are new and emerging ICTs, borderless economies, merging cultures with a clear shift in what was previously understood of the order of the world or the world order. So it seems then, food security within this construct is more than the determination of nutritional balance in adequate food that is available and affordable in sustainable ways. It is a pivot in outcomes in the sustainable development goals that give definition and determination to the quality of life of the Earth's population. Among these international goals, if you will, Sustainable Development Goal 1, number 2, number 3, capturing milestones that include poverty, hunger, and health. The definition of food security must include then, in a wider context, what are these social, economic, environmental, and political imperatives that give scope to our understanding of its meaning. Within these parameters are those terminologies which include climate change, and in this regard, energy production and use, population, the growth, movement, quality of life of people, global markets, that's the production and trade, commodity pricing, healthcare, pharma, insurance, disease, pandemics, for sure. So then, to the extent that these are variables that support our interpretation and our understanding of the concept of food security, there are local and international policy frameworks that support the relationships between all of these. So the movement of people in today's migrant world, I would say, is both a virtual and an existential reality. Populations exist and coexist in an ecosystem that has implications for both the national, implications for the built environment and the natural environment. Migration and the free movement of people within and across borders has implications for populations generally in the fundamental areas of poverty and the experience of poverty, of hunger, its experience, and of health. So to the extent that these are also indicators of wealth, nutrition, nutritional value, and quality of life, the need for equity, fair play, social justice, the need for these things, to the extent that these are indicators of these things, it has made it necessary for international agreements to be developed, local policies to guide state actors and people in general with regard to these issues. So we would see political manifestos often including positions regarding migration and the people groups that are involved. These are sensitive issues because of implications for the interconnectedness of the variables that were previously described. In the United States, for instance, the candidates for president are often also associated with sometimes extreme polar positions regarding migrants. Quite often at the southern border, where poverty, health, and health-related and health resulting in food insecurity in South American countries have caused people to flee these jurisdictions. So public policy has had to be developed, enacted to defend, and sometimes to determine citizenship and the position of migrants and what this has for implications for food security. Migrants enter the workforce, they influence the minimum wage and the indicators of poverty, of hunger, of proper health care for the population. Food security to include production, storage, and distribution, and its attendant challenges for the cost of production, user affordability, commodity trading, and international relations regarding food has implications for seeds, for fertilizers, the use of water, its availability, collection and storage. So these in turn have implications for the experience of migration, both within and across borders, of not only for the poor and usually disenfranchised populations, but also for the middle class who desire to have a quality of life that is commensurate with their academic pursuits and their ambitions. So the region, for example, has had intra and extra-regional migration patterns. And these have had social and political influences with outcomes that have supported integration as well as economic development affecting food security. Migration beyond the region of the people of the region have had both push and pull factors. And these have included and are also influenced food security in receiving countries for migrants, as well as for countries from which these migrants have come. And so developed North American countries, including Canada, the US, have had migrants to supply labor to seasonal farms. These returning migrants have been able to improve the character of their experience of food security with improvements in with regard to the experience of poverty, health, hunger, and the index around that, while having contributed to the stability of the value chain in other jurisdictions as well as back at home. Now, I think Jamaica, as the largest English-speaking country, has also had another level of migrant from its shores, and described most often as a brain drain of highly skilled workers, most times with an income bracket that does not support the sustainable support of poverty, hunger, compromised health, and all of these which are directly related to food security. But we continue to experience the migration of these persons, and we continue to refer to it often as a brain drain, but it has implications for other levels of experience with regard to those variables that help us to understand food security. So these workers leave, and with that, they intend to be able to change or to transform the experience that they have had personally, but also of those who they have left behind. And they also contribute to the changing of the nature of food security in the countries to which they have migrated. Migration and its relationship to food security cannot be adequately discussed, I think, without an examination of the migrant population who now have citizenship in the receiving country, the diaspora, that contributes to the local economy, in as much as they perpetuate the local culture through their consumption of local products, of culture, and their desire for those inputs as exports, as well as through their remittances to family back at home. These remittances support outcomes in those variables that help us to better understand food security. They transform the reality of those who are back home, particularly when these remittances become a significant contribution to what is the GDP of the receiving country. And so food security in its construction, where it reflects poverty levels or changing poverty levels, different types of experience of hunger or healthcare or quality of life. These migrants have added value because of how it is that they interact in the host country and respond to those who are, if for want of a better term, left behind. Ultimately then, I would close by saying, we must ask then what new policy perspectives should be or can be or ought to be developed to protect the indigenous construction of food security as that construction evolves within the context of changing global relations and relationships, and even in the experience of a pandemic. What are the new perspectives that need to be challenged of how we used to see policy developed to support sustainability with regard to these inputs that define the character of what is food security? Secondly, how can migration that is impacted upon by a pandemic and within a pandemic, how can that experience, whether virtually or in reality, existentially, how can migration that is impacted by this pandemic that we are experiencing be engineered, I think, with new policy protocols to protect participating populations of migrants, because they will continue to go after the new norm, if we will, after we have determined and defined how it is that for the need for migration will still exist, and actually will have emergent new ways in which the experience can happen and is going to happen. And we then have to look to see how we protect the population receiving and the population from which they have come as migrants, to support sustainable ways in which food security can be enhanced. And then what are those local and international security risks that are faced and must be contended with in the population from which migration would have occurred, and certainly in the population to which those migrants would have gone? What are those risks to the experience of food security and its attendant characteristics that help us to better understand if we want to have sustainability with regard to those development goals that people must experience, that define the characteristic of poverty, that define healthcare, that define quality nutrition among the population. What are those risks and how do we prepare to engage with a population who are migrants and those who must treat with the development of the